So at 1 hour, 98% of the strands are shorter than full length, though they can be brought to full length with more time. They will simply contain one or more mutations. The 28% represents all full-length copies, even if not faithful copies, with an average fidelity of 83 to 92%.
And in living things, we know that the sloppiest living thing that can stay alive to replicate its own DNA, it makes a mistake 1 out of 33 million nucleotides. So that's the world record of sloppiest replication in the living world. 1 mistake out of 33 million. What they have produced is 1 mistake out of 12. So they're a million times off what we know a living thing needs to survive, okay?
Rob laughs at the yield and fidelity, comparing them to modern cells, which have very close to 100% yield and fidelity. They will always compare everything to modern cells because that's their script. Everything they ever talk about always comes back to this dishonest comparison. But let's continue describing reality. The logical question would be, what length of RNA is required and what is the maximum error rate allowed in polymerization such that the strand is selected for and effectively replicates? According to Joyce and Shostak, a 25 nucleotide strand could have done this. For a ribozyme of this length, an error rate of around 2% is tolerated, so perfect replication is not necessary. Even for longer strands, with a 100 mer, there can be an error rate of around 1%, or a 200 mer, around 0.5%. The perfection of modern life is not needed, and in fact, higher mutation rates at the origin of life were likely crucial in more rapidly finding useful sequences. And there's more. As a solution to finding this low error rate without enzymes, they've suggested that early RNA may have used 2-thiouracil instead of uracil. Sulfur is ubiquitous in nature and plays a big role in protein chemistry. It has been shown that thiouracil has a stronger pairing energy with A than uracil, and with this modification, error rates around 1 to 2% have been achieved. This is just one example of a totally viable solution that has been proposed that dishonest creationists would never touch with a 10-foot pole. But despite their willful ignorance, we are indeed making steady progress in the direction of prebiotically plausible sustained replication, and we are nowhere near clueless, no matter how many times James shouts as much. Now, with all of that for context, let's hear a bit more from these two.
188 nucleotides is quite complex for a ribozyme. And the chance of something like that randomly using itself in the prebiotic world is far less than the chance of finding one specific atom somewhere in the universe.
Another entry in the classic creationist script, whining about the probability of that specific sequence forming, instead of focusing on the principles that research demonstrates, which can be applied to countless other sequences.
Even if they had this in 100% yield, then what? Just to have an RNA is not life.
Wow, good thing that James the super genius is here to tell us that RNA is not life. Yeah, we are talking about systems of molecules that produce life over time.
Nobody solved the mass transfer problem. But this is where how much material do you start with? So say I go to the laboratory and I start with a kilo of material, a kilogram of material, that's 2.2 pounds of material. I take it on a number of steps. Say I take it on 10 steps. But now I've run out of material because I've tried many things because the yield, this is the problem that Rob was talking about, the yield may have only been 1%. So I take that 1% and I bring it on. The yield of that next reaction may have only been 1%. So it's 0.01 times 0.01. So you take your kilogram, multiply it times 0.01. Take that number and multiply it again times 0.01. And so you run out of starting material. So what we do in the lab is we go back and we start making more, now using the chemistry that we worked out. But nature doesn't have that advantage, so nature never kept a laboratory notebook. So when it runs out of material, it's over. It's done. There's no going back. That's the mass transfer problem.
Again with the mass transfer problem, which is James the laboratory synthetic chemist proving to everyone that he can only understand chemistry one narrow way. Start with X grams of starting material and make one modification at a time until you reach your target. If you run out of stuff, you need to start again. Newsflash, that's not how nature does chemistry. Nature works with complex mixtures and carries out thousands of reactions at the same time, while all the molecules interact with each other and influence the rates and selectivities of all ongoing processes. Nature doesn't run out of material because of some imaginary instability. Reactions are reversible, non-replicating polymeric structures are created, and their building blocks and were amplified once successfully replicated. This is probably the best example of how someone like James pretends to have so much relevant experience, specifically does not understand this field. This isn't James just lying, genuinely does not get it. Nature doesn't need a lab notebook. Get a new script.
Nobody's ever been able to make the polymers.
Delved into
Small
destiny,
molecules,
written in the stars.
memorize them into larger molecules and build them to make us up. Polypeptides, polysaccharides, polynucleotides. Nobody's been able to make them.
James truly has no shame. All of this has been demonstrated by Dean's face, and he just continues to pretend it doesn't exist. Peptides and oligonucleotides have been made by prebiotic yeast industrially, and polysaccharides were made by enzymes.
These compounds, you say, well, there's been all this time. No, there's not been time. It's as soon as you make one of these, as soon as you make an RNA, it has 4 hours to survive. It's 4 hours to survive.
Again, 4 hours for RNA. This is so easy to disprove, it's ridiculous. Apart from the research we discussed, let's look at studies testing mRNA strands injected from COVID vaccines. Significant quantities are still present inside the injection, and that's with molecular machinery actively trying to degrade it. RNA does not degrade as rapidly as gene does.
And then there's the whole protein folding problem. So it's not just that you had to have the right sequence of amino acids. Now that you have this, now that protein has to fold up into three-dimensional structure. Because what happens is if you have 100 long, it would take 10 to the 95 possible mutations. If something is over 10 to 48, there's not enough time in our universe. So 10 to the 95 isn't just 2 universes. It's a trillion universes of time.
Now we get to protein folding. Leventhal's paradox. They're saying that if proteins had to sample the entire conformational space to fold, it would take them longer than the age of the universe to find the most stable conformation. But they do fold smoothly and quickly all the time, so how do they do that? Of course, God is sitting there folding them all by hand. Hey Brainiacs, the folding isn't random. It's guided by the amino acid sequence and the maximization of electrostatic interactions. All the potential folding patterns are not equally stable, not by a long shot. It's simple thermodynamics. It will fold in such a way so as to make as many electrostatic interactions as possible, thereby bringing the system to the lowest energy possible. That's why proteins have stable three-dimensional structures. So-called paradox is actually about which conformations proteins sample and in which order to arrive at such a fast folding process. He just doesn't understand it. Here's an analogy. Let's say you're rolling 100 dice all at once. How many outcomes are there? 6 to the 100th power, which is around 10 to the 77. A crazy huge number. Let's pretend each outcome is like one protein folding pattern. If you roll these dice over and over again, you'll never get the same outcome twice in a trillion years. So how does protein folding work? It's crazy. Okay, now put magnets in one face of every single die and roll them on a metal surface. Look at that. Now you'll get the same singular outcome every time. That's the way the protein folds. And guess what? It's electromagnetism that's responsible in both cases. The conformation that has the lowest energy is the way the protein will fold. Just like the magnetic face of each die adhering to the metal surface, it's the lowest energy for the system of dice. Rob and James can't even grasp this dynamic concept, let alone the kinetics of proteins.
Nobody's explained the similar properties, how molecules line up together, line up. This is called the Leventhal's paradox. Just in a single yeast cell, protein alignment is 10 to the 79 billion. 10 to the 40th you can't have the universe. 10 to the 90 is the number of elemental particles in the universe.
It's really more of the exact same stupidity. James says complex molecular ensembles involving the non-covalent interactions of many proteins are so improbable that they can never arise randomly, using the exact same principles by which proteins fold. shape. Proteins also form atoms. Like the forces do not require any time. Creating higher order structures consisting of several proteins is easy and it's done routinely in lab. It's just quaternary.
What? Why?
College freshmen know this.
The other thing is, let's say we had to take a cell,
Why?
structures, all the amino acids, have the higher order structures, all the polysaccharides, all the polynucleotides, the DNA, RNA, have all of that, and put each component in separate bottles and give them to any researcher in the world and say, not under a rock, but in your laboratory, you could Humpty Dumpty back together again. In other words, put these components back into a cell. They wouldn't even know where to begin.
This is another one of the dumbest things James has ever said, and he said it many times before. Of course we can't assemble a cell piece by piece like it's a Lego set. Guess what? Nature never did that either. The first living system was already the product of a long line of evolving systems of molecules. This is just like his conversation with the idiot Stephen Meyer in the Humpty Dumpty problem.
Well, it's the Humpty Dumpty problem, right? You've got all of these pieces, but all those pieces just not a living organism made.
And here's Rob insisting that nature somehow opposes the formation of life.
It seems that nature is telling us that natural processes oppose the formation of life through step after step that we went through.
He clearly never read all the papers I've provided about systems dissipating free energy and the formation of life being the direct consequence of the second law of thermodynamics. And again, James was just daydreaming about Jesus when three people were discussing exactly this at the Harvard Roundtable, where James pretends nobody was discussing anything relevant to the topic with him.
Thermodynamics actually favors this because everybody talks about equilibrium thermodynamics. That's the theory we're all taught, and not about Prigozhin's work in non-equilibrium thermodynamics. That if you have enough species to start with, chemical species, you're sufficiently far from equilibrium. Describes pretty much all of the universe that we know, and you continue to invert the energy, like this planet or.
One.
Then it is inevitable that ever more complicated regimes evolve. I mean, this is mathematics. It's been proven, and it's been verified that the simple chemicals, that various kinds of reactions that simply do that experiment. So that to me says, life is wait long enough. When I started, it was in my paper.
Explicitly, the thermodynamics of it, favors metastable states, not the stability that you guys are looking for. Metastable states that have a differing lifetime. This is peace, that's all science.
And this is for an individual life, or for life itself.
And it goes way back before the cell became. James, you're like a lazy undergrad who falls asleep during every lecture and then complains that what's on the exam wasn't covered in lecture. Anyway, wrapping up this video, prompted by Rob, James reveals what his next move is going to be. He's going after the textbook manufacturers.
Let's deal with the primordial soup model. This model has come out not by current day origin of life, folks. This model actually came from the Babylonians. And out of that primordial soup also came their gods. So life came out of that primordial soup and their gods came out of that primordial soup. It's a stupid, idiotic model that's thousands of years old. It's about 3,000 years old. And then people have run with this thing. And this is what everybody is taught in school. So let's first start by getting that out of the textbooks. And I think they should just take it all out and say we're clueless.
Yes.
We have no idea how it happened, and everything that we have tried it hasn't worked. So we have no hypothesis of how life originated, number one. Number two, we have never been able to even make life in a laboratory. Nowhere close, not even a single bacteria. Nowhere close to making life in a laboratory. And just say it, just like that. And let students go away and say, hey, this is an interesting problem that maybe we want to work on. But stop this nonsense. I mean, we can take one of these chapters and compress it to one paragraph. That's it. Clueless. That's what I think should happen.
Yes, James is whining about the Babylonians again, so I don't think he caught my previous comment about his Hebrew mythology getting lots of ideas from them. And he states his goal: get real science out of textbooks and put in some religion instead. Yes, that's right. The primordial soup model, which just says that a mixture of molecules formed the first living systems, should be replaced with "we are clueless." Can you imagine a biology textbook doing this? How about all the chapters on evolutionary biology? It's just a theory, and theories are dumb. We are clueless. Let's keep going until the textbook is the Bible. This really is astounding to hear, even from the mouth of such a lying fraud. 70 years of research, the evolving field of systems chemistry, which again is what primordial soup would really be called if the people who came up with that phrase 100 years ago could have known.
It's only 70 years old, damn.
Today. None of it is real because James says so.
It's about the same age as my grandparents.
So everyone else must be too, because he's the smartest boy in
That's
class.
epic.
Allow James to remind us that beyond ignoring 70 years of science, he has no proof that primordial soup
Models is not just three guys soup
Jesus
they have it. Yes.
Decided by destiny.
primordial soup, hydrothermal vent, smelly pond. He thinks smelly pond is different from primordial soup. James, what is the smelly pond model? Go ahead and explain that to me, and how it differs from the primordial soup model. And while we're at it, what is the primordial soup model? Are you sure it's the lightning lizard? Even though I humiliated you in a debate about this exact lie, and you just ran to the board and played with chalk?
Talk about the primordial soup model and all of these things. That's the question. It's the primordial soup model. This means small.
Delved into destiny.
You were absolutely clueless. On polypeptides, you never get used to public that reaction. Over and over again, it's living creatures in the textbook. Show me the textbook. Show me the textbook that says all of them form into slithering creatures. This takes model.
Fate is upon you.
Molecules work together. These form higher organisms from out of the water. Molecules form higher organisms that come out of the water. Textbook. They might even have the textbook that does it. The smelly soup model. They have the list right there.
We're all still waiting for you to show us any textbook in the world that says what you're pretending they say, James. Can you really take a whole chapter and compress it to one paragraph or one word? I tried to show you what these textbook chapters actually look like since you've never read one. Do you care to try and compress this into a single word? Show us,
If you ever wanna
James.
trade tactics,
Oh wait,
I'm
you'd have
always
to
ready.
actually learn about it first, and that would demolish your entire scam. This is why I will never stop exposing and humiliating James and the rest of the TI. These bozos are really serious about this. They are going to take all the millions of dollars from their wealthy Christian nationalist donors and actually try to change science textbooks, just like they went to court and tried to put religion in science classes. They will use all their money and resources and political influence to assert their Stone Age beliefs on public life, in clear violation of the separation of church and state.
Shadows of
They are actively trying to poison society and bring us back to the Dark Ages. There is no amount of humiliation I can throw at James that will ever amount to what he deserves for this despicable behavior.
Well, thank you so much. And let me just say why there's not a whole lot of other people. It's because of what many does to the careers of people who are non-conformists. You take on something like this, and the community will blacklist you.
Poor baby, he's been blacklisted. No, James, everyone just knows what a lunatic you are and wants nothing to do with you. Remember when you admitted exactly this?
I've been ostracized, and I not just religion, like ostracized, it's broader than that.
delved into destiny. Oz, repeat. Skyward.
You did this to yourself, and everyone knows you're funded by the DI, so you're financially obligated to lie to them. This is your crusade, and you'll follow it until someone stops you by force.
Origin of Life Research is a scam. We're going to put up here a quote from Lee Cronin because he says I didn't say that he said it was tongue-in-cheek. On his original tweet, Lee Cronin did not say that this was tongue-in-cheek when he said Origin of Life Research was a scam. He said that a year later on Lex Fridman's podcast.
Remember when I bet that James would keep using this tweet even after Lee called him out for misrepresenting him right to his face? What did Lee say he was going to do if James didn't stop?
I clarified that to Jim a number of times, and he said it. And then to the point at which I have to just get a cease and desist and say, if you keep purposefully making stuff up, I am going to basically suggest the legal means you stop that.
Man, wouldn't it be funny if Lee sued him? I do hope James will keep playing with fire like this. Anyway, that's about it for this video. Again, the title says they're going to talk about RNA replication, and they basically didn't at all. Rob brings up one choice paper, spins it into failure for the whole field, and ignores thousands of other, much more relevant papers, just like every creationist has always done and will always do, because they want to misrepresent the field as being very limited, and also because they have no idea how to discuss the science. The entire video is just James spewing his greatest hits that have been debunked 1,000 times. Luckily, with all the attention James is attracting, there's plenty more to say regardless. Remember when we heard from Andrew Barron, Jim's former colleague? He's the one who showed us that James is the king of hype and commits plagiarism on the regular. Well, guess what? Another one of Jim's former colleagues, Evan Osman, was emboldened by Andrew's initiative, and he reached out to me with some stories about James that are even more pathetic than the ones Andrew told. Want to hear them? I know you do, so here we go. So thanks so much for reaching out. It sounds like you have some interesting stories about James. Why don't you just go ahead and let it rip, I guess.
Sure. Let me start by sort of explaining why I'm doing this in the first place. So, I have a lot of ties to Rice University. I got both my bachelor's and my chemistry department there. I was a postdoctoral researcher there under Nobel Prize winner Richard Smalley for a year. Then I was executive director of the National Science Foundation funded research center at Rice for 5 years. I interacted with Jim both when I was a postdoc and when I was affiliated with the research center. I've been following your video back and forth with Jim since you started it. But upon hearing the comments from Andy Barron in your most recent video, I realized that I could corroborate or even expand on some of the stories you mentioned but didn't go into detail yet. And so I wanted to see about doing that. It's an interesting question, though, why I didn't speak up about this sort of thing earlier. Because it has been quite a few years since I've been across. And the reason for that really says something about the sociological dynamic here. Jim is, or rather was, a powerful individual. Crossing him was considered by many to be a career ending, because he would take it personally, and he would use his connections vindictively. So from a career standpoint, it just wasn't smart to speak out against it. Three things have changed now. First is Jim is finally losing his influence. Way he was treated at the Harvard Magic Grounding video on he shows that pretty clearly.
Let me start.
Secondly, I've recently let that convenient
By royalty,
quite security,
skyward.
so Jim is threatened.
Make way for you.
And
Written in
third,
the stars.
we're in a political climate now where standing up for truth in our lives has become dramatically more important than it used to be. And as the idealist, I feel like I'm on all of that. So,
Delved into destiny.
As you wish. This was well done.
you'll see the connection of this, Jim's habit of being vindictive and
Let me scribe. Decided by
using his
destiny.
power in the stories.
I guess
So,
this is it.
the issue is, for me, Jim is an embarrassment for Rice University. It's frustrating to me that he is tarnishing Rice's name by spouting his unscientific nonsense and calling it science. What I want to do here in this conversation is to add my voice to the growing chorus that says, no, Jim does not represent the Rice University that I know of. So, that's my motivation. I have 3 stories about him that I want to share that bear on different aspects of that. None of them are about angiogenesis, which I know is what's spawned this whole thing. But they do speak to connection for Jim between his religion and his character, how he approaches science, and his character personally.
Thanks very much for agreeing.
Yeah, happy to do so. So, the first story is that I was a postdoc in Rick Smalley's lab. I'm a co-author on a paper with Jim Tour. We were working on ways to solubilize single-walled carbon nanotubes in water, and so what we were doing was wrapping them with amphiphilic polymers to isolate the hydrophobic material, the nanotube, from its hydrophilic environment in water surroundings.
Shadows of fate.
The paper was published on this paper at Jim's co-author. But his entire contribution to that paper
Written in the
was
stars.
to make some suggestions to Rick that Rick's students had already made.
Delved into
There was
destiny.
nothing that Jim had suggested that was in any way new. And I know this because I'm the person that wrote this paper.
Nice.
When I was working on the author list, I was told to include Jim because it was politically the right thing to do, and that he was aggressively persistent and vindictive enough that we were better off just putting his name on the paper. Now, according to Google Scholar, that paper has over 2,300 citations, which, if you look at Jim's publications list, that would put it about 5th in terms of most cited papers that he has, and yet he contributed nothing to that paper, and it makes me wonder how many of Jim's 700 plus publications are like that, where he
I think the Raiden team's still stronger.
wormed his way onto a paper without ever having actually contributed anything meaningful to it.
Right. Yeah, this is not his own grad students that he didn't do any work. It's a
The
completely
campaign
unrelated group
begins.
that he just had absolutely nothing to do with it
Can I
whatsoever.
go catch up on
Exactly correct. He had like a hallway conversation with Rick at one point. I talked to Rick about what Jim had said in that conversation. And I pointed out to Rick that
Illusion
all of
shattered.
those things that Jim said, your 2 main students on this paper had already pointed out to you, and Rick agreed with me on that. So frustrating, very frustrating. My second story about Jim, this was when I was executive director of that research center at Rice. One of the center activities that I helped manage was the educational outreach portfolio. had museum exhibits, we had teacher education programs that were run by pedagogy professionals from the education department.
Fate is upon you.
We had research experience for undergraduates, we had continuing education programs, very, very broad portfolio of
Delve into
programs that
destiny.
we were seeing as part of the Center Prize. Jim had this pet project, however, that he felt should constitute the entirety of our center's educational outreach activities. And purportedly, he tried to pressure the National Science Foundation, our funding agency, to make us take that program on.
By
It's
royal
called
decree.
NanoKids. So, what was this, miraculous thing
Torn
that
to oblivion.
fix our entire educational portfolio? Well,
Shine down.
Jim had drawn skeletal structures and organic compounds
Delve into
like stick
destiny.
figures.
Decided by
Great
destiny.
drawings of human sticks for the bodies. Jim then had his students synthesize those things. Jim envisioned these stick figures as being characters in videos, games, and other educational materials
Illusion shattered.
that explain science to kids.
Odds
That's it.
revealed.
That was the entirety of the whole fundamentally flawed idea.
And so, making a stick figure molecule somehow teaches anyone anything about chemistry. Yeah.
Right. But from a pedagogical standpoint, who's the audience? The stick figure characters would be appealing to elementary school students, perhaps. Maybe junior high students, though even that's a stretch. But nothing past that. Who is going to understand what these skeletal structures are? Typically, what's that?
College students would, but
Yeah, the sophomore level organic chemistry students. I mean, maybe the occasional advanced high school student,
By royal decree.
but
Shine
for the
down.
most part, college students. This fundamentally disconnect makes the entire idea not just
Fate is upon you.
platform.
Now you shall perish.
And fortunately, we were able to
Finally, some target
there
there is no escape.
But this story, to me, illustrates the general lack of respect that
Let me
Jim
break the
sees of
storm.
he has this idea, he thinks it's the best thing since sliced bread, and so everybody's funding should pour 100% of their money into it. It's narcissistic, is what it is. Okay, my third story is the main one that I really want to talk about, though, because it was so personally offensive to me. While I was executive director of the center, I still interacted with my former postdoc advisor, Rick Smalley, quite a bit. He started out as the faculty director of the center, and then once that position was handed over to another faculty member, he continued to be a key contributor and a driver of the center.
And away I go.
Fortunately, in 2005, Rick died from
Your journey ends
Revealed by.
here.
Come on
These
out.
last year or so, and especially
Shine down.
the months, showed a
Delve
decline
into
in
destiny. Decided by
This happens to
destiny.
be horribly
Inner
stable
soul shines
because
eternal.
he taught me so much about that kind of science. During that period, Jim dug his claws into Rick mercilessly.
Illusion
After
shattered.
Rick was
Target
dead,
practice.
his conversation with Rick.
Leave my space.
He dug his claws into Rick by things like private conversations in the hospital
Written in the
Rick's
stone. Torn to oblivion.
After Rick was dead, those
Shine
conversations
down.
were described very publicly by Jim as
Stretch your wings and wait.
Rick's funeral was among the most disconcerting events I've ever attended. Jim had taken control of the entire event, and of all people, Hugh Ross was,
By royal
as I
decree.
describe it,
Illusion shattered.
no speaker. It was over some kind of closed scientific conference. I sat in attendance accompanied by multiple faculty that had known me extremely well for over a decade, and who had worked alongside Rick for even longer than that. Ross gave a speech that lauded Rick's conversion, seeing the light, as it were, and then used the platform to promulgate the idiocy of intelligent design. The comments I heard from my colleagues aren't fit to repeat in a public forum, so I'm not going to. Since then, I've had numerous examples of interacting with former students and postdocs of Rick's that were unable to attend the funeral. I've described to them the last year or so of Rick's life and this experience at the funeral, and I've uniformly received the same response: horrified, incredulous shock.
Another please appreciate.
Picture that
Shine
Jim
down.
was so publicly spread about Rick's folly and faithless was utterly unrecognizable.
Wings of darkness.
This is unrecognizable. And I've been interacting with Rick within weeks of
Decided by
his
destiny.
cause.
Inazuma
Is
shines
it possible
eternal.
that Jim, through his long hours of milking his relationship with Rick during Rick's waning hours, might have greater insight
There is
into
no
his ultimate character than I do? Yeah, it's possible. I don't know how likely that is. To me, Rick was trying.
Shadow Raven.
He had flaws, but ultimately every interaction we had
Now you shall
pushed the
perish.
edges of our
Illusion
assumptions
shattered.
toward a greater understanding. He's never satisfied with Darity that an experiment was made. When experiments were possible, he pushed us hard to do those experiments. He was occasionally wrong, and I can cite several examples of that. When he was proven wrong, he took the evidence immediately and adjusted his position. And then he began speculating, open to public criticism from everyone around him. What this new understanding for what we were trying to do and about the reality we were living in. What bothers me so much and makes me just livid is that Rick's last year or two were hijacked by Jim. And in the weakness of being close to his inevitable death, Rick didn't sufficiently safeguard his legacy against being appropriated by someone who was so obviously agenda-driven rather than data-driven, as Rick was himself. Now, my personal impressions of Rick, while it matches those of his other students and postdocs in my conversations with them, that doesn't prove that that Jim was misrepresenting what happened in those conversations with Rick at the end of Rick's life. But I really only see three possibilities for what could be going on here. Either Jim misrepresented Rick's positions, and after all, the only other witness to those conversations is now dead. Or, two, Jim fooled himself into believing that Rick had actually converted, and wishful thinking can go a long way towards making you hear what you want to hear. Or, Jim preyed on a respected colleague in decline, successfully converted him, and then crowed about that conversion afterward very publicly for his own purposes. So if you look at those three options, either Jim is lying, he's stupid, or he's reprehensible.
Or a nice cocktail of the three.
Right. And it's...
To me, it's very clear. He wanted to announce that a Nobel Prize-winning scientist was a Christian, so he fabricated the story and then used his funeral as an opportunity to evangelize.
I mean, I'm not willing to say 100% that it is fabricated. And one of the reasons for that is that there are
I was gonna do a world question, but I think I want to play
the
Zelda.
last couple of years of his life